Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to RobMotive. Today I want to talk about lifts. Lifts for the Toyota Tacoma in general, not specifically. You know, I had a comment recently. Somebody asked me a question on the channel. It was, what lift should I get? Well, you can't really ask a question like that. You see, I'm not you. I don't have your truck, and I don't know what you're looking for. There are really three different types of lifts. Three different categories, if you will. One is no lift. And no lift is my favorite. My favorite from a functional standpoint. Not my favorite for aesthetics or maybe even versatility. But no lift means you leave the truck the way it is, the way it was designed to be. It rides comfortably the way that it's supposed to. It hits the bumps and the ruts and the divots the way that it's supposed to. The steering is all good. You have no rubbing. I mean, it's the perfect setup, right? For somebody who's happy with it and doesn't want anything else. But let's face it, we're Toyota Tacoma people. We don't want that. We want height. We want lifts, right? The second and the cheapest is a block and spacer lift. And it's exactly that. They stick a block in the front, they stick a spacer in the back, or vice versa. I always get them confused. And what's the difference really? They're each hunks of stuff that raises the truck up. Now, the problem with those is it kind of compacts everything. That means you're going to have a rougher ride. I don't care what anybody says, you put a block and spacer in, you're going to ride rougher. Because now you don't have as much travel in your suspension as you did before, because it's compacting it, because you're putting something in that raises it up, right? It's not going to be as effective as it was before. That's where I started. I started with a block and spacer. Not really because of the cost, although it may have had something to do with it. Obviously, I'd rather spend, $400 to $600, maybe less if you do it yourself, than $2, $3, $4, $10, whatever, $1,000, depending on what you put in. I wish I'd have known to begin with. Honestly, I wouldn't have cheaped out and went with a block and spacer had I known how it was. And a lot of people aren't forthright. There, of course, are a lot of companies that sell block and spacers. They're not going to give you the negatives of what they're doing because they're making money. They're selling the product, right? I would always recommend staying away from a block and spacer lift unless it's all you can afford and you're not really very sensitive to the ride. The third category, if you will, is the suspension lift. The suspension lift is the best. It means you're going to replace possibly the coils, the struts, the springs, the leaf springs, the shocks, all that kind of stuff. Now, there's a few things to look out for when you do that. I put what I'll call sort of a suspension lift on my magnetic gray metallic truck. It was just shocks. I put Bilstein adjustables, I think they were 5100s, in the front and in the rear. And in the front, they're adjustable because there's like a clip that goes in there where you can set how high they are or how low they are. You can set them at stock height if you want. I don't recommend going with the full Monty. In other words, I think the tallest you can go on those is close to 3-inch, plus or minus point something. But the problem in doing that is now you're stretching that shock out as far as it'll go, and that's going to affect your ride quality. You don't want to do that. I would go one notch below, which is what I did, and that's going to give you almost a level lift, a level truck. It's going to be off maybe a 1/4 inch or so in the front. Not that big a deal. It's really not something you can even see, and that's thanks to the way the arch is in the wheel well of the Tacoma. If it was just a true semicircle, then you might be able to see it, but it's some kind of funky different angle, right? So the eye really can't pick that up. On the 2020 Tacoma that I had, I also put some sort of adjustable on it. I don't remember, but I went too high, and the truck sat like this. Felt like I was trying to blast off. I didn't really dig that. In hindsight, I would have rather have just had the truck level. Some people really like that look. It's more of a desert runner kind of look, so that it can hit in the front even more when you're going over those bumps and things. Not really my thing. Now, as far as problems go, I had a few problems. The first lift that I did, which was the block and spacer, I put different wheels and tires on. course, they were bigger, and the offset of the wheel makes a difference. It can come out, it can go in. It needs to go out far enough so that you can clear the upper control arms, the UCA. The UCA is that kind of wishbone looking part you'll see if you look under the wheel well of the Tacoma. You need at least minimum inch and a half clearance between the edge of your tire, I mean the thickest part, and the UCA. If you don't, when you go over bumps, divots, ruts, things like that, turning the wheel, it's going to rub. You're going to know it, you're going to feel it, you might even hear it if it's severe enough. You don't want that to happen, obviously, so you need to get that wheel out so that you have enough space. But in doing that, if you don't have a high enough lift, you're going to have another problem. Now, the wide part or the surface of the tire is going to rub on the fender well, possibly front and back, maybe even on the inside when you turn. You've got to get the body up high enough so that you have clearance for that. I ran into that myself. I had two issues. Too close to the UCA, I could maybe get my pinky in between the edge of the tire and the upper control arm. That's not enough. And a lot of shops will tell you half inch, 3/4, that's all you need. I'm telling you that's bolt BS. You got to have at least an inch and a half preferably. Obviously, the more the better, as long as you're not running into rubbing problems on your fenders. That is a drag. Brake lines. The brake lines have to be long enough. If you start stretching the body up and you don't put longer brake lines in, you can have problems there as well. You have to be cognizant of what the lift is doing with your other components. On the Tacoma, you can get away with about 3.5 inches, 3 inches, as far as the brakes go, the brake lines. I've done it, I had no issue. But I did have issue with something else that would have cost me somewhere between $800 and $1,500 to fix had I fixed it. And that is the CV axle boot. If you look underneath again, you're going to see this rod. It's the CV axle rod, if you will, that has a boot on each end. It's just a plastic boot. There's grease inside there. My problem was the truck was lifted at 3.5 inches too high, and it kind of made the axle rod, or the CV axle itself, kind of go at a weird angle, right? Too sharp, too severe. I tore the boot. When I tore the boot, all of the grease and stuff inside there, that keeps the CV axle bearing lubricated, came out. I didn't discover this until right about the time I was trading the truck, so I didn't fix it myself. I'm sure the dealership ended up having to do it. I didn't know beforehand. The only way I knew is that I was underneath the truck doing something and I saw all this grease. And I thought, where is that coming from? Am I leaking oil? What's the deal? I discovered, because I looked and I saw a tear in that boot, probably about yay long. And I think that was the flexing of the joint that connects the CV axle bearing to the rod, all of the technical stuff, and actually ripped the boot. Could have been that the angle was just so severe that it stretched that boot enough that it just ripped. So these are a few things that you have to watch out for, and make sure you bring it up to the shop. If you're going in and you're discussing doing a lift, ask them about the brake lines, about rubbing, about the upper control arm clearance, and lastly, about that CV axle. Is the angle going to be too severe and you're going to have a problem? Anyway, I just wanted to get on here, talk about the different lifts for the Toyota Tacoma, and maybe some issues that you should consider if you're looking at having a lift done on your Tacoma. Leave a comment, let me know. Ever had any troubles like this? I know I have. Leave a comment, I'd be curious. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. Bye.